the landscape itself, that there's no one doing that. And no matter what we do here in the plaza, no matter how much I think it's something you'll really enjoy, there's nothing like the landscape in New Mexico. And that is what we reflected always in the artwork at Market. And then finally, just a reminder of how far we've come. This is the old La Bajada Road. You come from Albuquerque, you go down. It used to be a treacherous road, and it used to be all switchbacks, and people would fall off it all the time. And this particular postcard was shot in the Palace of the Governors in 1912, and that's Maria and her sisters in that postcard. In the back of the postcard, a friend sending a message back to her family someplace, bought pottery directly from Indians on the La Bajada Mountain outside of Santa Fe, and also from station agent Buckman in the midst of the desert section. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it. I'll be glad to take a few questions or comments. Corrections. I have first corrections. Correction. Oh, this is good.
Oh, well,
I'm just kidding.
A clarification.
Please.
In Sundays New Mexican, there was a chronology of events, the 90 years, and it talked about in 1922, the first Indian Fair, that Maria tried to enter a black-on-black pot, and it would not be accepted.
That's not true.
I was going to ask you.
That's not true.
Okay.
What happened was, they had developed that pottery in 1920. It had already been displayed at the Fine Arts Museum. Actually, spring of 1920 is on display there. And they're experimenting around with it. They haven't yet, and most of the pots from those few years are mostly polychrome designs put on these shiny black pots. There's some great examples in the collections here. And if you look at, you begin to understand just how they're struggling with the difference of surface, reflective surface versus a matte surface, basically. And they're struggling with that, and she did have some black pottery, and there was some black, I showed you, but there was some newly made black pottery. Now, how quickly does black pottery take on? The Tunita Roybal wins mid-20s, and then by 1928, 29, everybody at San Alfonso is signing their pottery, and it's all pretty much black, more or less, all black on black. There's a few red on black, black on red. Polychrome only comes back because Maria and Julian work on it. Everybody else abandons it pretty much at that point. So it's pretty straight line. And I can't account for the New Mexican. We really try. I think if you read that again, I think that's a paid advertisement. So again, the value of market. I know I'm not going to pick on anyone. I don't mean it that way. But I think the value of market is this. That, again, this goes back to how big and chaotic it seems, that we have sometimes, and me included, that's just we, as non-native people, we have an expectation that we can learn about native cultures. And I think that we can. But native people spend their lifetime learning, and they learn by repetition, like dance days and things like that, right? So by going year after year to market, you have the same ability to do that. It's really a wonderful gift from people, from Pueblo people in particular, to do that. And so to go there and just learn little bits each year, like if I knew what I knew now 30 years ago, I could have asked those people those questions. But there's no way I could have known those things without the observation, without the questions and so forth. So that's really what we're seeing, through market is that. Yes?
What would your 3 learning tips be for a brand newbie?
Relax. Just have a good time. Just really have just luxuriate in 14 square city blocks of native art and not worry about everything. And just listen to people, talk to people. Just put yourself in the middle of it. You're the center of the world for this weekend. Just think. I know you've been struggling with that all your life, but this is your chance. You are the center of the world, which is exactly, if you read about how native cultures sort of work, that you make the world work by your presence. So your presence will make Indian market work. So I think that's the most important thing. Have some fry bread. Join the organization. Join the organization.
I knew that.
Join the organization so you can come on Friday night to the previews. And you get a sense of things. And then I think just take your time on Saturday and Sunday. If you're here for market specifically, It goes on for 2 full days. 16 hours is much more than anyone can endure, except for me. But on Saturday,
I just moved here, so.
Just relax. Go on Sunday morning, sit on the bench and watch people. Don't worry about something.
Talk to the artists.
Talk to the artists. I didn't say that part, did I?
You didn't say who to talk to.
Oh. Definitely. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Can anyone bring their art to market, or is there a selection process, or how does that happen?
There is a selection process, and it's a thorny issue of who is native and who is not native. And there are a lot of self-proclaimed native people. Let's just say that for a moment. And so we have certain rules. Our first rule is you must be a member of a federally recognized tribe or nation, Canada, U.S. based. And that's a lot of, we're not going to talk about all that, how that happens. And tribes are sovereign nations, and they determine who are members. But you have to be a member from that place. And then people apply. We had about 2,000 applications this year for about 1,000 spots. And then what we do is we judge on the basis of quality. And one of the asks, and because there's such a diversity of art, that there are certain areas, like in jewelry, we haven't really talked about jewelry very much, but there is a plethora of plastics being made in jewelry, and then also you can go to the jewelry store and there are bins of beads. You want to see what those beads look like? Anybody know where those are in town? 65 gift stores under the portal. There are so people string beads and sell them as native, which I understand why people do that, but they're not handmade. So we look at those types of criteria. And then paintings is more like, wow, that really works, or whew, I'm not sure that'll work. And then we have a couple places, like with the film, we pretty much take all the film that's entered. It's entered slightly separately. People are not in booths. But like last time we showed one award-winning films. Saturday we'll show them again. Does that give you some idea? Yeah. Yes?
Does SWAIA take a percentage of booth sales?
No, SWAIA takes no percentage of booth sales. We do collect a booth fee from everyone, which is rather inexpensive. We haven't raised the booth fee in 6 years. And basically, every artist on the plaza, it costs $993 per artist on the plaza. And the artists pay less than a third of that for their booth space. So that's why I'm the fundraiser and talk about art. And no percentage of sales. I think there's lots of ways to do that. And I'm not sanguine about that at all. I think that's one of the most powerful things that happen. So again, if you flip through the New Mexican supplement in the middle, did anybody see the New Mexican supplement from Sunday, the magazine? So in the middle, that photo of like, who's in that? Sheldon, Tony Abeda, Cody, Ken, Kit. I mean, it's really a great photo, and it's really staged. That's Tony's house, by the way. But it's a great stage. So look at the sort of freedom that people have to express who they are. And then look, I promise I'm not picking on anyone, I'm an anthropologist, but look at the other ads from the galleries that are super serious about Indians. So they're all stoic and looking off into the distance, or looking at their art, lovingly, whatever they do. But here are these 7 characters jumping up, wearing great clothes and doing it. So the value of not interceding in the sale or being in the middle of the sale is you get that directly from the artist. Even in the ads, you get the directness out of the artist. And that's the gift to SWAIA to everybody. Any other questions? All right, well, we'll see you Saturday morning, bright and early.
Thank you.
Okay, so who here has not been to Indian Market? Not. Just a few of you, okay. Well, welcome to Santa Fe. And how many people have been to Indian Market more than once? More than 10 times. More than 20 times. All right. I don't remember anything about Indian Market either. Can anybody hear me all right? We've got this handheld mic, but if I do it, I can only do a comedy routine if I hold the mic. So I don't want to do that. What I'm going to try and do is just talk a little bit about market, its development, and where we are today, and how we got there. As Shelby indicated, I've had a nice career, and I've done several different things in my life. Mostly I was in the museum world. And the museum world's an astounding world in so many ways and wonderful. We built this building here, added on exhibits in Washington. It was an extraordinary once-in-a-lifetime thing to build a museum on the mall, to build the collections and research programs, as well as the building. They're really one-of-a-kind things, but I come back to Santa Fe, and I agreed to head this organization that is this year celebrating its 90th year. Who was there in 1922 at Indian Market? Well, right now I feel like I was. But the point being, it's a 90-year organization that is like the hidden organization. It started as something called the New Mexico Association for Indian Affairs. Now that organization was developed to be an advocate for political water land rights for Pueblo people. It actually is the organization that put the first nurses onto the Navajo reservation as well as in the Pueblos. It basically embarrassed the government to do things and do them better. At the first Indian market, which actually was organized by the Museum of New Mexico, the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs wouldn't dare come here because he had issued orders for anti-dance, anti-Indian culture, literally in writing that any practice of Native culture was prohibited. And so, and then also in the schools, that there was a prohibition against anything Native. Language, if the kids were doing art, they couldn't draw anything Native. It was really an incredible sort of moment. And in the middle of that, or in the midst of that, or in spite of that perhaps, this Indian fair, Indian market thing happened in 1922. And so the Commissioner Berg from Washington sent out one of his deputies. And the deputy said, well, it's okay for old Indian people to make arts and crafts. Young people need to get on and become useful. And what he meant by that is on the lower rungs of society, we need maids and we need people to paint houses and do our laundry, maybe bake our bread, and things like that. So they should go on to Indian school and become useful instead of making this arts and crafts thing. Now, the thing that happened, and this was a sort of image of how people thought what Native people looked like, and the idea that Native cultures in 1922 is that they were going to go away. Not Native people per se, but the cultures themselves were going to die. That was a general way that people thought, and museums were established to save Native culture, whatever that means, by filling up shelves and drawers and so forth. And if we look at the choices that people had in 1922, they were very limited. They were very, very limited in terms of being a Native person and what was available to you in the greater society. But the reality was that people needed to enter into the cash economy in some way, and the arts or arts and crafts were presented as one way to do that. There had been, of course, curio production for tourist trade, but very few people had taken it further than that, other than small little things that were a nickel, maybe a dime. Maria pot, I know it's famous, everybody likes to talk about, her pots sold for 50 cents or 75 cents along with everybody else's. And they weren't sold as individual pots, but they were sold as, buy this group of pots for $1. So it's a very different sort of time. If you just fast forward, what's so different now? What's so different now is that people have all sorts of choices. People go off, and the kids go off from artist parents, and they become doctors and lawyers. They go off to some of the best schools in the nation, they come back to be artists. So it's a very different circumstance that people have created for themselves. But this sort of generalized way that we think about the Southwest, or people picture the Southwest, even today, people sitting on the ground, making stuff, selling stuff. This is another way that people worked on these things, that there's so much intact here in the Southwest as compared to other parts of the country. I know if you're from elsewhere in the country, or a Native person from elsewhere, you might dispute that. But this was a painting done in 1938. And these are not fantasies or memory culture about what people were doing in her village that day. But when Jerry Montoya painted this painting, these are things that people were doing that day in the village. So the idea that culture has gone on in much more strong elements than before is quite something. We were recently, my wife and I went down to Zuni to visit some friends, and we were moving around the village driving, and we had to pull over because all the kachinas were out in the village. Because it was lunchtime, actually. They were feeding the kachinas in one of the society houses. And so there's literally over 100 kachinas sort of milling around the main intersection. Anybody ever been to Zuni? There's one stop sign in the middle of town. I don't know if you realize, but at that stop sign, they had police out, and with their lights going, you know, just so the Kachinas can get through and people can be fed. A truckload of mud heads go up. You know, I mean, the vibrancy of things, and the important thing about it too, and the reason I bring up that story is we, being outsiders, non-native people, might think for a moment, wow, that's not very native to do it in the middle of the street with the stop signs and the cop cars around. But you know, it's been going like that for a long, long time. That Society House has been there for longer than any of us, and that's where it takes place. It's just as native today as it was 190 years ago. I'm supposed to be 90s. So 90 years ago, let alone 180 years ago. And this is what Indian Market looks like now. From this little tiny start, about 80 or so people participated. Everything was judged by village that first year. It was indoors. It was in a building that the front remains of. Only the front of the building is there. And that front of the building is a redo by John Galmin. Actually, it was in a castle style, all brick. It was the Armory building. It's across from the Burrito Company. But this is what Market looks like now. We have 100,000 people who come to town for Market. We get 1.5 million hits on the website. I'm very proud of those numbers because what brings people together is native culture. I also want to point out that 12% of the city's gross tax revenue is earned in just these next few days. I mean, it's an extraordinary circumstance for a city founded in spite of native people, colonized city, to have this happen. Indian Market's also outside. This is a couple years ago. Anybody remember this rainstorm? Oh, good. Well, this is part of Market, is just being here in the Southwest, being here and living on land, you know, as people have for generations and generations. You can always tell a Southwesterner because they just get in the tent. Everybody kind of moves aside when you get to the tent. In 10 or 15 minutes, it should be over. And we're hoping it does this all week long until Friday at 5. And this is really what Indian Market is about. This is about family communities. When we talk about Market and we speak about it, even as non-artists who participate, this is what it's about. It's about these generations. People tell me, I hear people say, oh, it's too big, or it's much too confusing, and without picking on any museum or any cultural institution, it's great in a museum. You know, you develop an exhibition, you get like 200 words per case, and you get to bring people along on your thinking, right? So if I'm going to do something about pottery, let's say, I get to give you an introduction, and then I get to lay out my thinking, and hopefully by the end you're thinking, wow, he really knows what he's doing, or I don't agree with that. So what I've done is I've narrowed your field of vision about a certain subject matter. Not with Indian Market. You don't get any narrowing, you only get to broaden your field of vision. And this is one of the things that happen. You have these multiple generations. You have 3 generations of growing Thunder Fogartys here. All big winners at Market. You're missing one other. There's actually a 4th generation that should be there as well. But this is the sort of thing that happens. So you have a booth like this filled with people that have learned in the community how to be artists. And those cultural values, those principles that stand behind the art. And next to Joyce and her family might be an artist that got an MFA and grew up in a city. So it is mind-boggling or dizzying in the sense that there is so much that goes on. All these families. We have booths now that are 6 and 7 generations deep. And on the collector side, or the other side of the table, the non-artist side of the table, we also have 2 or 3 generations deep now. So I'm not kidding when people raise their hand, and it's more than 10 years, that you come to Market for 10 years is an extraordinary circumstance. This is also what happens at Market. I love this photo. It's a little older now, I guess, but so it goes. But I love this photo because things are on the ground. And why does Luann Tafoya, who won Best of Show that year for that big red sort of oval pot, this one here, this up here, well, I guess all the ribbons are around it. And that was a pot. That was a $35,000 pot. But she takes it and she puts it on the ground. She puts a blanket down and puts it on the ground. Why does she do that? Well, she does it because that's how her mother sold pottery. So Market is about extending that tradition. And I think that if the government had known that how arts could strengthen communities, and allow communities to tell the outside world who they are, as well as to tell themselves who they are, I'm sure the government would have found a way to stop it in the 20s. You also get this sort of sense of this moving idea about native art. You know, people all the time want to know, well, is it native? You know, is it more or less authentic? Is what they're asking you. What they're asking you is because it's made today and it's beaded on a tennis shoe, or maybe it's a painting on a canvas, whatever it is, or photography or film, that is somehow less authentic, less Indian than something made in 1880, which is the magic date, because anything pre-1880 is more aboriginal, more indigenous somehow, and that is just a lie. Do not believe that for a moment, because people's success in living here, Pueblo people in particular, success in living here, is because they have evolved over time. If they had stayed the same, they all would have stayed at Chaco, and the archaeologists would have found the bones there. But instead, it didn't work. People got up and left. Galisteo didn't work. People got up and left, right? So people have forever keep changing. So when you go and you see those mudheads riding the back of a pickup truck, they're the same mudheads, the same principles, that even if the guy standing from 200 years ago would be flabbergasted that the mudheads are in a blue truck and not a brown truck, he would still know that they were mudheads. Yes, ma'am?
What is a mudhead?
A mudhead's a kachina, like a dance figure. Let's just leave that. Thank you. I just assumed everybody got that. So
I was the one who said I'd never been.
that's right. I appreciate the question. Russell's a happy guy here. Russell's a very happy. He's usually pretty happy. And Russell's happy about many things here. And certainly he's happy about the ribbons on his table and that everything on that table is sold. People make 30 to 100% of their yearly income at market, which I think is an astounding figure in itself, and I think an important figure. But it's getting more about that Russell is able to work a year, and by having these pieces that then travel. The big piece in the middle is in New York City. So think about, again, this 1922, this 90 years ago, that was it possible that any native-made piece would be in a nice home in New York City? Certainly it would be in the American Museum of Natural History or the Smithsonian, where things would be saved for native people. But these things are in great art collections now. So the idea that Russell makes a pot, it goes out into the world, means that Pueblo consciousness also goes out into the world. Market's also about this stuff, about family again. So this is Sippy Crazy Horse, standing with his recently Stanford graduated son. Here's a great example. Sippy goes off, gets a full scholarship. I'm sorry, Waddy in the blue shirt gets a full scholarship to Stanford. Takes him 5 years to finish, not bad. And he comes back and now he's a jeweler, like his dad. His dad left here one time and he just entered the Navy, into the submarine corps. And this is Roselda and Lawrence Sophie. We lost Lawrence this winter, but again, the idea of generations. Roselda made the outfits this particular year, with both the matching outfits. And then everybody gets in the act. I hope none of you in these photos. But everybody gets in the act. People like to dress up. Some of their stuff has ended up here in the collections. But so people like to get in the mood, without a doubt. And people like to buy as well. Part of it is people spend, people collect out of passion, out of compassion perhaps. They're attracted to the beauty of the work. There's all sorts of reasons why people collect, and I think it's really one of the most interesting elements. Indian market is also absolutely unique. And what I mean by that is, usually we talk about artists and non-artists as being across the table and so forth, but for a couple days a year, we're all the same. We're all Indian market goers. It's really a time of the year where the boundary melts. And then the artists look all, this is Marla Allison. Marla's Laguna Hopi. She's painting, that's her mom over her shoulder. You can tell by the smile, it's exactly the same. But this is Marla here. She's doing these paintings now. She just went to Rhode Island and talked at the Innovation Conference, the annual Innovation Conference. This is Linda Tafoya Sanchez. Is that right? Sanchez Tafoya? Sanchez Tafoya. Got it? So someone from Sanai. Oh, I got this all mixed up. But one village, she married into another. One of the great potters. I just love her expression, how excited she is. And you can see her work. Her work is featured in one of the Indian market publications, a great series of photos about making pottery. So take a look at that. And this is a very important part of market too. This Elvis is in the house. This is Elvis Torres up there. And yeah, we got to do all this stuff, and we'll have plenty of bathrooms for you when you come out to the market over the weekend. This is talk a bit about market and how it reflects its origins in good ways. This is Lonnie Behill a few years ago in his booth. Lonnie's from Bombay. When I was here as director, Lonnie had just returned and to the Southwest. He had been a financial advisor in Washington for about 7 or 8 years. And as Lonnie says, as only Lonnie can say, he said he heard Clay Mother calling him back. He wasn't sure why Clay Mother called him back, but he came back to Clay Mother and to work with the clay. There was really no living potter in his family, but one day we were actually here in the museum, and we went downstairs, and I had 2 plates from Bombay, the village where he's from, and I showed him these 2 plates, and I knew one plate was made by an uncle of his, and one was not. And I said, oh, I think this is made by your uncle. And Lonnie, being Lonnie, picked up the other plate, the one I did not point to, and he said, oh no, this is my uncle's. And he started crying, being Lonnie. And he said, oh, this is my uncle's. And I looked at the plate that he was holding that Lonnie had never seen, and I realized all the similarities of his pottery. I'm not sure that Lonnie's pottery is biological, in the sense that his uncle's hands guide his hands. I don't know if it's spiritual that Clay Mother guides his hands, but there are features about that pot by his uncle that he had never seen that match up almost identically with his pottery. That's one of the powers of pottery. And one of the things we rarely hear from, are in the past, I should say, we didn't hear as much from, are potters in terms of what's important about pottery. And what Lonnie did in 1991 with this piece was he brought a piece of pottery to Indian market that caused quite a stir. If you can believe that this beautiful piece caused a stir. Does anyone know why? No painting on it. It's utilitarian wear. It's not really Pueblo pottery. So someone from the outside, meaning white guys said, well, this isn't Pueblo pottery, this is just like cooking ware. We can't judge this at market. How are you going to judge a pot like this without having any painting on it? So our outside perception of Pueblo pottery was kind of winning at that point. But Lonnie persisted on. He did very well with this pot. Won for best of pot, but not best of show. It's a gorgeous piece. Obviously, what Lonnie was focused in on getting us to do was to see shape and form, to understand technology and materials as creating beauty. In other words, to look and understand pottery as process instead of finished product. And he did that very well. A few years later, then, he did win Best of Show with this pot, which is equally gorgeous, or maybe even more so. But now, 10 years later, the world was ready to accept that a Pueblo person could tell us what Pueblo pottery should be like. Now, Indian market is this long process, and it is a week-long. Shelby indicated we have lots of activities. Last night, we showed the winning films. We have 11 classifications of art: jewelry, pottery, sculpture, wooden figures, diverse arts, and so forth. And what we do, starting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., we start setting up the convention center. And beginning at 1 o'clock, about 500 artists will bring their pieces in for entering for judging. You do not need to enter to be in market, and about half the artists in market, we have about 1,000 artists in market, enter their work for judging. And if you enter your work for judging, there's certain roles, things, that sort of thing that happens. And in a category like pottery, we've been talking about pottery, you have certain types of pottery that are very much defined by Pueblo people. So traditional pottery, as compared to other types of pottery, all types of pottery are accepted. But in the traditional Pueblo categories, it has to do with your materials and gathering your own materials. It has to do with your construction of the pot and doing it yourself. And it has to do with the firing technique. What that means is, if you go and you buy a bag of clay, and you sit down at your kitchen table and do everything else like people have done for generations, it doesn't count, because you haven't ventured out onto the landscape to get your own clay as your relatives before you and after you will do. So it changes the core values or principles of the piece. Maybe it doesn't change your aesthetic appreciation of the piece. Maybe it's a gorgeous piece anyways, and so on and so forth. But the fortitude to go out and gather those clays in the slips and so forth, to mix them yourself, clean them and mix them and so forth, and prepare them, and to do it as it's been done for so many generations is something that's quite extraordinary. And it exponentially increases the problematic nature of constructing clay vessels. So buy the stuff out of the bag if you want, buy the pre-made stuff, but you really shouldn't. So what we try to do is provide some guidelines. Now, it used to be an organization, and I have to say that under these last 4 years, we've tried to get people to be more conversant in these areas, rather than an organization having a rule book to tell you what's Indian and what's not Indian. That was very uncomfortable for myself and other staff members. So we've taken the rule book, and the rule book is now 100 pages instead of 300 pages, as an example. But what happens is that people come in, and they bring their work in, like I said, about 2 pieces each. So we get about 1,300 pieces of work in on Wednesday between 1 and 8 p.m. And then on Thursday, we have 70 judges coming this year. 70 judges. 70 egos, fragile little egos, all in the same room. I'm so glad Tony's going to be there. We have Valerie here. Valerie's supposed to be one of the judges this year. Tony's judged several times. But we've got these little fragile egos, and everybody's going to get along just fine. And eventually they do come, here's Luann's pot again. Eventually they do come up with this. There is this very wonderful discussion about what wins and what doesn't win. We have a best of show that also wins. That's what this discussion is here. And there's several, really, this is Jack Rushing, for example. Jack teaches at the University of Oklahoma. There's people in there who run galleries. There are collectors in there. It is a wonderful thing. As mixed and diverse as Indian market is itself, we have the same mixture in the judging. And you don't have that many other places. This is what receiving looks like. This is what the first preview looked like in 1984 at the LaFonda on Mezzanine. Now it's Friday evening. I hope you're all members of the organization so you can participate in that. This is what the ballroom at the new convention center looks like, ready for preview. Who here has not been to preview, other than you? Anybody not been to preview? Well, who's a member of the organization? Oh, you should all be raising your hands. And you go to Indian Market on the street, you're not a member? I'm done. You've got to join the organization. This is the reason why these museums are here. This is the origin and creation place for Native arts. Without this organization, it would have been just curio and ethnography. All the stuff would have been museums. You would have had little pinch pots. That's all there would have been. But this is the organization that created Santa Fe as a center for Native arts. There's a reason why IAI had moved here in 1962. It wasn't because they offered any land for them. It's because there was already a focus and center of people creating artwork. That's the great thing about Market, and that's why you should join. And then this is the preview itself. We get about several thousand people in on Friday evening at the convention center. You're all invited to come as long as you're members. We need your support, I mean, quite honestly. But this is what happens, and people come to previews for all different reasons. It's a big family reunion. It's great. Everybody's there. People actually go around with the list, the booth list, and they're actually making notes about what booth they're going to go to first and what they're going to buy. I know you hear a lot of comments about, oh, Market's all commercial now. Well, there are moments at Market that are very vibrant with cash, let's say. And the Saturday morning first thing is one of those moments. And there's about 25 to 40 artists who sell out almost immediately. And those, those are very strong collectors who come in to buy those works. But by Saturday late morning it's quiet again. On Sunday morning is one of my favorite times because it is so quiet and nice. It's kind of like the day after in a way, and it's very nice to sit on the benches and just to take things in. Market is also more than just those 1,000 artists. There's music, there's literature, there's film, there's food, there's people watching. Can't miss the people watching. And now there's parking downtown too. So there's no excuse not to come. And this is Therese Tassarni, and this was a piece that she won with. This piece ended up in New York City on Fifth Avenue. This is Jason Garcia. Jason, he is actually in Madison. He's not at this moment, but he's starting an MFA at Madison, Wisconsin this year. This was a piece I won a couple years ago. And this is, again, about who Native people are today. So in Jason's piece, it's about his growing up with comic books and transforming or just juxtapositioning his own history, Popeye and the kicking the Spanish out of the Southwest in 1680 with comic books, that the suspense and the superheroes come out of his culture rather than out of the exterior cultures. And I just love this picture from Daryl and Rebecca Begay, who won Best of Show, and just get a chance to see this belt. And the belt is amazing. It's based on an idea of a concha belt that you're probably aware of, but actually it's a story of Navajo people, including some things down here on the end that you may not recognize. But this guy here, anybody know who that is? Plays center field for the Boston Red Sox right now. That's Jacoby Ellsbury. So, where does Indian market come from? Well, fortunately, this is all here in the collections, except for this rock art panel. But this is where Indian market comes from. And so, starting here in the upper left, this is what Edgar Hewitt, the director, wanted. He wanted Indians, I'm going to use the word Indians just the way it sounds. He wanted Indians to go back to who they really were. He felt they were soiled or adulterated by the Spanish. So he wanted Indian people to go back to how they were in the 16th century, pre-Spanish settlement. So he dug things up. This is up from Bandelier, what's now Bandelier National Monument, this piece on this side. He dug things like that up. And then he gave them to the potters, including Maria Martinez, and said, make this for me. Replicate this. Make this exactly. Because if you make this, as your ancestors did, you will return to be more Indian than you are now. Well, that sounds terrible out loud, doesn't it? But he wrote about it. And that was his idea, replication of culture. He had this other idea, and it doesn't work because the person who made this piece in 1913 lived in 1913. She didn't live in 1450. You know, you can wear clothes from the 70s, and you'll still look like you're in 2011. Right? It's visual acuity is an amazing thing that drives cultures along. So the next thing Hewitt did was this. He said, here's this lump of clay. And he found a lump of clay from Puye, which is another ancestral site to the Santa Clara, actually. And he found this lump of clay, and then he saw this rock art panel, which is actually turned sideways because it fits better on the screen. It's supposed to be upright. But he saw this panel, this rock art panel, Sergei, which is another ancestral site up by Los Alamos. And he said, why don't you make these two things together? So that's what these two are. So that's the first Avanyu put on a pot to sell to non-Indians. And it's also another attempt at Hewitt trying to get them to make stuff the way he understood it. Why rock art? Because rock art predates Spanish. So it's a way to be more Indian than the sort of Spanish idea of pottery. And of course, Spanish had been here several hundred years. There are many confluent things between Spanish and native cultures, many good things, maybe not some bad things. There are several things we enjoy very much about native culture today, like that were borrowed from the Spanish, like wheat production maybe. You know what wheat production led to? The all-Indian Pueblo bread. How about that dough bowl that we think is so traditional? That's only 200 years old. So 200 years sounds like a long time. It is a long time. But 200 years in a culture that's thousands of years old, not much time. So there are many good things, but this was something he wanted them to do. Now fortunately, Edgar Hewitt, being the man he was, got interested in other things. He moved on to San Diego and tried this and that. And he left this idea to Maria Martinez and her husband Julian, and he left the idea of creating better pottery to one of his assistants, Kenneth Chapman. And so Chapman just kept telling Maria, just make me a better pot, whatever that meant. And this was the pot. She came up with 3 of these. This is on display here now and always. And she came up with these 3 beautifully polished pieces. Next thing she did was this piece here, also on display. But she combined several things about how she understood the outside world wanted pottery, as well as how she understood pottery as a potter herself. And then finally, 1920, the winter of 1920, they developed this very famous pot, again on display here. This is the pot she consistently identified throughout her life as the first one they pulled from the fire. So this is the first 2 blacks, or black on black, that made intentionally for the outside world. It may or may not have been a style stumbled on at other times. What they then discovered was that this design systems, like these polychrome systems, didn't work so well. So Julian Martinez then reinvented the idea of designing black pottery. Does anybody know where this type of pottery comes from, this design, this feather plate design? Other than Isleta casinos? Okiawinge Casino? It came from these types of bowls here, from members culture, 900 to 1050 AD. Julian was very interested in pottery. This was one of his favorite designs here. Anybody know what this comes from? This here? Come on! No, this is Acma pottery, Acma Laguna pottery, along with this arch as well. So it's Carrizan. He just loved that stuff. So he was very eclectic. He also, Hopi pottery was the other thing he picked up from. But this members pottery, and we don't really know what happened. He had little notebooks that he kept all the time. But the members pottery is not discovered by the outside world until about 1914, 1915. And there's a guy who, a collection comes up to Santa Fe actually, just about 1915, 1916. And I'm sure Julian saw that, or he saw the Bureau of American Ethnography report and took it from that. But the problem with taking this bowl and creating this is taking a two-dimensional surface, right, drawing something on a flat piece of paper and making it into something that works on a three-dimensional surface. And now everybody thinks this is a traditional design, which it is a traditional design. This is also then what early fiestas looked like. And basically, let's start with this photo. The plaza was walled off or palisaded off. And unless you paid a fee, you couldn't get onto the plaza. And the idea of fiestas was to create community consciousness or common community history. Everybody knows about the tricultural story here in the Southwest. Can you name the three cultures? Lithuanian, Croatian. So this whole idea of Indian, Spanish, and Anglo was something that's created out of this fiesta. It starts just pre-World War I, picks up again in 1919. Anybody know why in 1919 it's picked back up? Teddy Roosevelt's going to visit his battalion of Rough Riders in Las Vegas. So they figured, we've got to do something for him. So they developed this idea of fiesta for a community celebration. And it's just on the outside edge of the time these fiestas went on, in the sense that community celebration had been something in the late 19th, kind of pre-radio, pre-private car era. And he developed this, and if you're a Native person, you want to participate, you're outside of the fence. This is the Fine Arts Building, and you're selling your stuff outside that fence. If you're inside, as a Native person, this is right in the corner of the plaza. This is the northeast corner of the plaza. We built the stage sitting on the plaza like that. You can see the Palisade back here on Palace and Old Santa Fe Trail. You danced or you participated as Hewitt wanted you to dance or participate. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is 1920. Here's Edgar Hewitt right here, narrating to the crowd. It's basically facing into the plaza across from the Palace of the Governors. And this is a parade of progress. And the parade of progress starts with Native people, prehistoric trade, and they're on like this galleon ship or a Viking ship. And that's Maria Martinez, and her husband's on there. Siana is on there, this famous singer who came and sang at Indian Market. And that was the first parade. That was the first float in the parade. Any idea what the last float was? No, this is not the last float. No, we don't know what the last float would be in the parade. It's a parade of progress. It's white people, Anglos. It's really uncomfortable, isn't it, to think about this stuff? And I think that the value of market, Indian market, and talking to you like this is how educational it is. That we're having a really good time. You know, you're visiting people, you're seeing friends. Maybe people come once a year and stay with you, and you've been going to market for years, and you have certain artists you go see. But amongst all that scurrying about and doing things and me bothering you about joining the organization and so forth, it's really educational. It really is. And it's educational because you're immersed in it. You're not standing in front of a case, you're not sitting down as some guy's talking to you, but you're right there. And I think that's really what the key to it is. First markets, of course, had archery contests. They had agricultural contests as well. This is the first market here. I just wanted to show you this. So this is the first Indian market. Now this pot, this is 1922, but this pot was made in 1917 for, as you know, I just told you that. And what year was that pot made? I'm not doing very good here, am I? No one goes, you get it right. That's the first black on black pot, that's 1919. But this is 1922. So what the organizers, what the museum did, was they said, we're going to put examples of good pottery out so the potters and buyers will understand what good pottery as compared to bad pottery is. So that was the idea in the first market, a little different than what we do now. And this is one of the pieces that's up there. There it is, right there. And this actually won an award at that first market. That's this piece right here. And then this won second place. And Maria and Julian Martinez did not win first place in the first year of market. Did not. They didn't win Best of Show the first year. Actually, Maria stopped showing in market by the late 20s. And actually, black on black pottery did not win an award at the first market. Nor did Maria Martinez win the first award for black pottery, black on black pottery in the market. It's actually Tanita Roybal who wins it in 1925. And if you think about why Maria and her husband Julian would push themselves out like that to have such note and to be so famous for that, you get an idea of what it means for her to have been a Pueblo person. This is other things that people did around Indian market. How would you know what was right? This is Kenneth Chapman writing at the bottom of the pot, so you know exactly which piece it is and who it's by, 1932 fair. This little sticker here was something, again, how do you tell people it's authentic or it's better quality than the poster painted things in the stores? Today we have the same problem, don't we again? We have a series of gift stores around the plaza. Things are primarily made in China or the Philippines. Green moldwares being sold as authentic. We made native materials. How do you mark those materials? I think it's back that way. And this here is your test. And this is Kenneth Chapman. This is the archives here. And if you're going to be a judge, you had to pass this test. And it says, if you find more than one type of pottery from Pueblo, list the numbers under each class and give the number of the best pot in each class. Not too subjective, huh? This is the woman, Maria Chabot, who moved, and this is my copy of El Palacio, by the way, but this is the woman who moved Indian market from the indoors to the outside under the portal. And you experience that all year long now with the portal program, but this is the woman that decided it should really be outside. And when it moved outside, some things happened. One of the things that happened was people had to reserve their spaces. So people used to sleep under the portal. My generation slept under the portal with their parents and grandparents to reserve their spaces. This is actually someone still in market here who's embarrassed to tell you that's her. But this is the sort of thing people sat on the ground, they brought their boxes, pretty much as the portal program looks now. Sleeping there, and then this is get a photograph of you can see everybody turned away from the camera. This gets you an idea of what things might look like. Here's what Indian market looks like today. Again, generationally, so incredibly rich and important. People from many different walks of life. Some put feathers, some just do their hair up. Joe just wears a hat, I see. Again, sort of generations.